Welcome. Today we're going to have a quick tutorial on making this little car bop along on a road. It's a great introduction exercise into Adobe After Effects and shows us how to do some really simple animation. And let's hop straight in. So hopefully you've managed to find and download this folder called Car Road. It's a zip folder. Once you've unzipped it, there are three little assets in here. There's one called Car Background. It's a still plate of the background. The car_fin movie is just an example of what we can try and achieve. And of course, the third one is car.psd. PSD standing for Photoshop document. So this is actually a layered document. It's got different layers on it. Wheels are separate to the body and all the rest of it. So that's what we're going to be using for animating. I'm going to go ahead and open up Adobe After Effects. I'm going to be using Adobe After Effects Beta. I have had some problems with the last version of After Effects, but these are all teething problems. But everything will be pretty much same as what you're using in After Effects, but a few tiny differences, so nothing that should affect us. When we first open up, we'll see this opening page where we can choose new project, open project. I'm just going to close this down. I don't use it very often. And here is our main workspace. So if we have a quick look at this, there are multiple workspaces you can build and also presets that you can use in After Effects. We are mostly going to be using this default one here. Over in the top right to start with is our project window. In here is where we're going to place all of our assets. So this is going to be anything from image files to video files to sound files, 3D files, anything like that can be put in here, can be put into group folders, stuff like that. But this is where we find everything that might be used for our project. Once we create a composition, and this little symbol down here is the composition icon. Composition basically consists of a number of different assets, be they video, images, sound, etc. And that's going to be our kind of like our little export project, so our composition. If we look over here on the right, this is going to be our viewfinder here. This is where we're going to see everything, and we've got by default some options of creating a new composition or creating a composition from footage. Essentially, new composition, if you do click on that, it will come up with, hey, what do you want to call this thing? What preset format do you want to build this in? What frame rate and what duration do you want to set this in? So if you are starting afresh with a project or you're dealing with a client, these are some important things to know before you start building something in the wrong format. But we'll get into that later. I'm going to ignore that straight away. We're going to look at this in a different way, and then down the bottom here, this is where our layers are going to go, stack, and over here on the right is going to be our timeline scrubber. So this will start making sense as we start bringing things in. I like to sort of suggest that After Effects is quite a lot like Photoshop, if you are familiar with Photoshop, except it's got motion, so it's After Effects on steroids. On the right, we've got some shortcuts to stuff, but we'll worry about that later. First things first, let's get our assets in. So, a couple of ways of doing this. So here's our project folder here. One way is to go to File and then Import. And you've got an option here, so Command or Control I to import, or Shift Command I to for multiple files. So you can bring your assets in one by one, or you can ask it to do multiple files. And sometimes it's actually better to bring them individually. So I'm going to go File, Import, File, and I'm going to find my way to the assets that I've downloaded. So if you have downloaded the download file, find them there. I've put mine on the desktop so I know where they are. And I'm going to start by importing car_background, and there it is there. And it's what you'll see is if I click over between this and the movie and the PSD, it's going to give me various options here, but the background's just a JPEG, it's a still image. So I'm just going to hit open, and you can see there it is there. We get a little preview of it there. It says car background JPEG. If you need to, you can stretch this out like so. It's going to give you a little bit more information, such as the file path, etc. But there it is there. I get a preview of it there when I click on it. Alright, let's bring in something else. Now I'm going to use a different technique for bringing the next thing. It all kind of works the same, but I'm going to drag stuff in. So I'm going to get the car.psd just to show you there's a different way of doing it. You can of course go Command I, and as soon as I drag the in here, this little pop-up will appear. So it's a Photoshop document, and this is quite important. It's going to ask me what kind of how do I want to bring this in. It's going to go import kind composition. Now if it does come in as footage, that's really not what we want, because footage is essentially video footage, and this isn't video footage, it's a composition of a bunch of layers. Now if you do go to the drop down for this, which I do recommend, you've got two options for composition and composition retain layer sizes, and for this one I'm going to suggest composition retain layer sizes, and I'll show you why. So once I've shown that, composition retain layer sizes and editable layer styles. Now layer styles are a different thing. This doesn't actually have editable layer styles. So if you are using layer styles in Photoshop, if you know what those are, then you may want to have that ticked off. It doesn't really matter, but if you are going into 3D, then it will definitely matter. But either of these at this point doesn't really matter. But composition, retain layer size for the Photoshop document, and hit OK. Now once I hit that, you'll see that we'll end up with another couple of layers. We've got our background layer, which we just brought in before. We've got a folder with car layers, and if I click on that, you'll actually see that there's some different layers in there. There's a front wheel, there's a car body, and there's a right wheel. And there's also the car with the wheels in a composition. So by default it brings it in as a composition as well, which is kind of cool, and I'll show you what that means in a moment. So all of these layers themselves are essentially what is in the Photoshop document. So I'm actually going to show you that by opening up car.psd with Photoshop. And being a Photoshop or .psd document, if you double click on it and you have Photoshop, it will open it in there. And there it is there. I'm going to zoom out a little bit, and you can see my little shortcuts popping there. It's a bit of a mess, but I'm going to rip off my layers panel. Again, you don't need to do this right now, it's just to understand a little bit about how this is working. And here are my layers levels, which is just a slight little color adjustment. I'm probably not going to use that for now. There's the car body, and there's the front wheel and the back wheel, and you'll notice it's got this checkered background which says it is a transparent or alpha behind there, so we can just see through the windows a little bit as well. So 3 little assets in there, and switching back to After Effects, there they are there. So in the preview window, there it is there. Now if you double click on an image or a layer in After Effects, it will open up in the preview window by itself. It's an important one to remember, because sometimes we accidentally click on things and we go, where is everything? Well, your composition's still there, it's just the wheel there. Alright, now without getting too far ahead, I do want to show you what the difference is between importing a composition with retaining the layer styles, which is what we've done there. So I'm going to import that car PSD again, except in a different way. So I'm going to go File, Import, File, or you can drag it in. I'm going to go to car.psd. I'm going to switch this to composition, and instead of going retain layer sizes, I'm going to go composition and hit open. I'm going to not worry about the layer styles again, and there it is there. So car 2 layers, let's have a look. So car 1 layers is the one that I initially bought in, and if you have a look at the front wheel, it is the size, that's the entire size of that layer. The second lot, where I didn't retain the layer sizes, and it's a bit harder to see because they're a lot smaller, let's open that up. You'll see that the wheel is actually in position of the entire document that it came from, which has its own merits, but at this point that's not really what we want, and mainly because we're going to be rotating this, and it's going to rotate from the center. So be aware of it. It's not a massive deal at this point, but I am going to delete that one, and I'm going to delete that one. Let's just click on them and delete. Alright, let's start this happening. So to start with, there's my background. I'm going to create a composition with my background, and to do that, very simply, you could either drag it into this timeline area here, or you can drag it to this little icon here that basically says create a new composition, and there it is there. It'll come up. There's our first layer. If you need to zoom in and zoom out, control Command plus or minus, and spacebar will allow you to get that hand tool up and move around. And of course these are up the top here. There's your hand tool there. So here's our timeline. If you hit the spacebar, if you're off the main view panel, if you're down here, this will actually run through our animation. You can see our playhead running through. There's nothing happening, so there's not much to see. But if I do scrub here to the end, you can see that if I move all the way over here to the left, you'll actually see that we have our time code here. So currently, this animation for me is set at 14 seconds and 23 frames. And there's my frame rate, 23.97. Don't want to get too technical, but different formats are going to have different frame rates. Now, if you do need to change that, if that is too long, if you want to only go for 5 seconds or 6 seconds, which is a reasonable amount of time for a visual effects shot, there's a couple of ways of trimming that down. One is to go to composition settings, and down here on duration, where mine says 15, I can change that to something like 8 seconds, so 0.8. So 8 seconds and however many frames. There's our frame rate there. You can change that at this point as well if you want to. I'm going to make mine 24 just because I can. But always try and set your frame rate correctly and your duration fairly close at the beginning rather than changing your frame rates later. It can mess things up a little bit. So click on that. And now if I scrub to the end, we can see we're now at 7 seconds and 23 frames. And of course, the 24th frame would be exactly 8 sections. So that's one way of trimming this down, or you can use it to extend. The other way is to grab this big dark grey bar up the top here, little blue end on this, and move it to where you want it to be. So as you move your playhead, you'll actually see that this will coincide with the time. So 4 seconds, 4 seconds. If I trim that down to there, I can then right click in there and go to trim comp to work area, and that will also trim that down. But I'm going to undo that, Command Z, and get that back to roughly about 8 seconds. Down below here, you'll see there's these little hills at the bottom here, and you can use that for zooming in and out. Alright, let's get some action happening here. The car layers. So here's my different car layers, and what I'm going to do, don't do this right now, but I'm going to show you what happens, is I'm going to drag these and drop them above my layer here. And I do have this levels option, which isn't really going to work for me, so I'm going to delete that. And here are all my assets. Back wheel. I'm using the move tool, V, so you can actually see what they are. There's my 2 wheels, and there's my car. And as you see, they kind of, when they came in, they were all stacked on top of each other. So this doesn't quite bring in all the layers as themselves. There's a few ways of doing this. One of the things I like to do is actually just go to the car project, so this little one here, and if you double click on that, it will actually open up in a new panel. So if you look down here, you can see car, and there's our background, and I'm just going to shift select all of those. You'll note they're all in the place that Photoshop had them, and I'm going to go Command C and then go back to car background and Command V, and it's going to place them all back together. There's that levels one. I'm not going to keep that. We'll talk about clipping that on later. So we've got the car body and the 2 wheels. Wow, a long way just to get that. But there they are, though. Remember, you can shift select or command select. You can change which layers are on top of each other, all that kind of stuff quite easily in here. So there's our playhead, nothing happening. And what we want to do is we want to move our car left to right. And to do that, if we go to this little arrow drop down here on car body, you'll see there's another drop down called transform, and in there are our basic transformation controls. One is the anchor point, and the anchor point is this tiny little target system in the middle. This is essentially where our main point of rotation is for the object. We're not really going to use that a hell of a lot. We've got position, and if you go over to these numbers here, you can see we can actually scale that, scrub that left and right, or scrub that left and right, and go up and down as well. So we can punch in numbers individually. We can drag it by clicking on those with your mouse, or you can physically move that and you'll see those numbers will change in the position. We've also got scale. There's a little chain if you need to scale it disproportionately. I'm going to undo that. Rotation, and of course opacity as well. So all of these things we can animate. Now the biggest problem that we currently have is that car body does not have the wheels following with it. So what are we going to do? I'm just going to minimize that for now. I'm going to get our front wheel and our back wheel, and I'm going to parent them to the body. And essentially all that means is wherever the body goes, the wheels will follow. And to do that, I'm going to click on that layer and go over to this little part here where it says parent and link, and you'll see this little swirly escargot snail icon. It's called a pick whip, or you can go to a drop down, you can actually select on it, but I'm going to use the pick whip, and I'm going to drag that so wheel goes to car body, clink, and there it is there. And now I'm going to go to back wheel and do the same to the car body. So now when I select on the car body, now the wheels follow with. And it's as simple as that. So if we scale, if we rotate, if we do anything like that, it will follow with that. Alright, now if you did happen to bring these files in differently, let's click on the front wheel here. I'm zoomed in at this, and I'm going to go to the drop down for rotation. Drop down, rotation. There it is there. Now it's good to know the shortcuts for this. The shortcut is R for rotation. If you hit that, it'll just bring up the rotation. Makes it a lot cleaner. S for scale. Let's actually bring all these up. Anchor point. I can't remember what that one is. Forgotten. P for position. Awesome. S for scale. R for rotation. And opacity, would you believe it, is the letter T for transparency. So that's a bit of a confusing one, but the other ones, once you get used to it, it's pretty good. Now if I rotate this wheel, go to the rotation here and rotate it, you see it's currently rotating around that central point there. Now that's not always the case. If that is out of alignment, do go to this little tool up here. The shortcut is Y. It's up the top, very top here. It's called the pan behind or anchor point tool, and this will allow you to actually move that target. So not every object's going to be aligned properly, but if we move that, and now when I rotate that, you'll see it's now rotating around that anchor point there. But if you bought these incorrectly, they should be pretty close to being in the right place. Feel free to move them if you wish. Alright, so what we're going to do is we're going to grab our car body and we're going to move it left to right, and we're also going to get the wheels to rotate. So once you get the hang of it, animating in After Effects, it's remarkably simple to get simple stuff to happen. And I'm going to go P for position for my car. I'm going to get my playhead scrubber, move it to 0 frames. I'm going to move my car off screen. I'm just going to put mine slightly off screen a little bit and hit that stopwatch. So as soon as that stopwatch is clicked, it creates a keyframe. There's a little diamond here, and that basically says at this moment in time, at 0 frames, that is the position of my object. If you move it, it will reprogram it, and it'll just remember that point. Now if that stopwatch is clicked, if you move your playhead to the end, in this example, and then move our car to the end, it will create a new keyframe at that point. So now if I scrub, you can see we're moving that car from left to right. Now if I stop somewhere halfway in between and I move the position of my vehicle, you will see it will actually create a new keyframe, and now that car is moving like that. But I don't want that to happen right now, so I can click on that keyframe and delete. And there it is, it's just putting along nicely. Now please note, you can copy and paste these, you can move the positions of these, you can swap them around, there's all sorts of things you can do. It's very, very editable, but once that stopwatch is on, that's what you can do. Now the cool thing with After Effects is if you see a stopwatch, you instantly know you can animate it. So there he is, zooming along. He's not doing a hell of a lot. The wheels aren't really spinning. So let's jump in ahead and do that. So I'm going to go to my front wheel. I'm going to minimize that and go R for rotation. And if we have a look at the rotation here, I'm going to click on the 0.0 and drag to the right. And you can see it's rotating clockwise. If I drag it to the left, it's going anti-clockwise, and you'll start getting a negative. Now, once I get to 359 degrees, there he is. As soon as it clicks over to 360, you'll get a 1 there, so a full rotation. If you want to go reverse, put -1, and the wheel will run backwards. But for now, let's try and figure out what we want for that rotation. So, starting position, I'm actually going to put my starting position here. I'm going to cheat this a little bit just so we can see what's going on, but I'm going to go, all right, rotation. I'm just going to reset these. So you can actually just right click and go to reset if you ever need to. I'm going to hit the stopwatch. So starting position, it's off the screen normally, but I'm going to move it there. And I'm going to move it there, and I'm going to rotate this a few times. Now, if you're really clever, you can calculate the circumference of the wheel and calculate the distance and figure, but I'm going to rotate this around about 7 times. Feel free to change it as you will. You kind of get a hang for it, and as you can see, that's moving. It's moving way too quickly, but from this point, keyframe to this keyframe, that is about 7 rotations. Way too much for that short amount of time. So I'm going to drag that over to the beginning. I'm going to drag that one out to the end, and now those 7 rotations are now occurring from the beginning of my sequence to the end. So over 8 seconds, that's going to be moving 7 times. And if you're happy with that speed, awesome, steal it. So I'm going to click on rotation. I'm going to go Command C. If you're on a Mac, I'm going to go to the back wheel and make sure my playhead's at 0 and Command V, and it will actually copy and paste the exact same rotation keyframe. So now both of my wheels are rotating, and as simple as that. Final things, well, if you did notice the first video that I showed you, the car was jittering up and down, and we could manually do this. Maybe we could jump into position and manually put in every frame or so. We could have that vehicle popping up and down, but that is a lot of work. So we could rotate it, put a little rotation so it's rotating up and down. Instead, I'm going to introduce everyone to some actions, or some scripts I should say, and to do that I'm going to go to the body of the car. Let's actually bring it out so where we can see it. There we go. And I'm going to go to rotation, and instead of just clicking on the stopwatch, I'm going to hit the option key and then click on the stopwatch. Now when I do that, don't let this scare you too much. It's quite easy once you get it. A little panel opens here with some words, and there it is. It says transform rotation, and I'm going to start typing in a word, and the word is wiggle. It's one of the most commonly used scripts in After Effects. So I'm going to go W-I-G-G, and as I'm typing, you can see there it is there, wiggle. So let's click on that, double click, and it's going to come up with some brackets, and basically this is going to say, how much of a wiggle do we want and how frequent do we want it as well. So I'm going to put in 2 numbers with a comma in between. I'm going to keep them fairly low just for now. I'm going to go maybe 4 and a 5, but you can vary these as you want, and that's going to wiggle the rotation of that. So let's have a look how that looks. So one's to do with the distance, the other one to the frequency or the amplitude. So let's ramp this up again. Let's go nuts with this. I'm going to change the second number to 50. See how that looks. Hit that space bar. Whoa, way too much. Let's knock that one down. I'm going to knock this down to 3, but I'm going to increase the frequency. Let's make that same thing like 30. So it does take a bit of playing around. Let's see what that looks like. Ah, there we go. Pretty bumpy. Alright, I'm liking that. So it needs a little bit of playing around, but there it goes. So remember spacebar, and it'll just keep looping over like that. Awesome. So a lot of fun to be had with that. A nice little thing that I want to mention before we package this up is that because this is linked to a Photoshop document, you can actually change the Photoshop document and it will update in After Effects. So to give you a quick idea what I mean by that, I'm going to reopen that up in Photoshop just to give you an idea, and you don't need to know how to do this right now, but I'm just going to do a hue and saturation change for the car body. Hit OK, and I'm going to go save that, so in this case Command S, and look what happens in After Effects. It updates in there. So this is linked to Photoshop. If you make a change to a layer in Photoshop, it will update in After Effects. At this moment, if you create new layers in Photoshop, they will not get transferred over to After Effects. It's something that I've been requesting for years, but existing files that you've brought into After Effects will update, so it's a nice way of training proxy. With that in mind, let's talk about the final thing, which is saving your project. So if you are finished your project and you're happy with the project, or you just need to save it, what you want to do is obviously go to File, Add, Save, or you can save a version by going Save As. So it's always good if you're doing something really big is save versions of it. So version 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, etc. But I'm just going to save this one, find a location for it. I'm going to keep mine in here for now, but I'm going to do something else really special. I'm going to call mine Delete Me Please, because I have a lot of these. So I'm not going to be keeping mine, but give it something that you know you can find later, and save. So I'm going to show you this folder. There it is there. So there it is there, deleteplease.aep, After Effects project. Now this project by itself, if you email that to someone or send it to someone to work on, just the .aep, and they open it, they will not be able to actually see what's going on. After Effects needs its assets. It needs the JPEG, it needs the Photoshop, it needs the sound, it needs video, it needs anything that you use in there, it needs to keep with it and link to it. If you don't, this is what's going to happen. So I'm going to take these folders and I'm going to dump them in the bin. And let's see what happens. After Effects suddenly doesn't know where those files are, and we'll come up with this message, and we just get test patterns. So it's still got the animations, but it doesn't know where those files are. So I'm going to undo that, and let's see if we can actually get our files back. Just going to get my animation back first. So if we do have that, there's my file. It's got the colored test pattern on there. I'm going to right click on that, and let's go to replace footage file. I'm going to have to re-find it. Car background, there it is there. Hit open, and it's going to go, hey look, it's found the additional stuff, and we're back. So remember, if you are saving an After Effects project, it needs to come with everything that you've used to build it. Now, a great thing that you can do, just as a matter of remembering all this, is every time you've created a project and you need to make sure you've got everything, do this. Go File, oops, here we go, and File, Dependencies, Collect Files, and it's going to say it needs to be saved. Great, I'm just going to save it again, and then it's going to come up with, actually I'm just popped off on another screen, sorry, there we go. And it's going to pop up with, once you've saved it, it's going to go Collect Files. I usually just leave this as default, but you can have it so it generates just a report, for example. I'm going to hit Collect. I'm going to keep it at the same folder name and then save it there. And what you're going to end up with is a folder which has, let's see if I can find it for you. Sorry, there's so many things on this. There we go. A folder, just going to move it here, which when I open has the After Effects project. It also has a text report when it was created, any assets in there, and also any footage as well. So it keeps everything in one place. Super simple, and that's what you would take with you, save to your hard drive, etc., or hand off to a client. Next thing, if you do have time, is rendering. I'm going to do a really basic render. I'm not going to get deep into it, but File, Export, Add to Render Queue. You do have Media Encoder, but I'm going to do it through After Effects. Add to Render Queue. Here it is down here, and the default settings are the highest, but you can jump in and change any of these render settings. Output, and output to, you do need to specify where you are going to save this to. So I'm going to throw mine on desktop in the car road folder, and let's put that in there, and then I'm going to hit the render button, and this should zip across. And once it's done, if you got audio, you should be able to hear a little bling sound. And if we jump back into this folder, there it is there, my little purple car. Always check the file size if you can. It might mean that you might need to change the output rendering, but besides that, that is it.